It was the Enlightenment philosopher Rene Descartes who came up with this whole mind-body dualism that's now become so ever-present in our current ways of thinking about the mind and the body. Rene Descartes is famous for the phrase, "I think, therefore I am." And right away, he's already putting the mind on a pedestal, and that in order for you to be, you need to think. He sees thinking as a mechanism of being and completely separate from the body. Descartes saw the mind and the body as existing within their own distinct, mutually exclusive spheres, completely self-contained from one another. But like I said, that's not how it works. The mind and body are constantly in communication with each other, and they're constantly affecting each other reciprocally. It's a very reductive notion to just reduce our entire existence into these two separate, self-contained spheres of the mind and the body. But Descartes' work on this was highly influential for the rest of modern Western philosophy and modern ways of thinking. These ideas being bandied about aren't exclusive to the realm of high-level philosophy. All these ideas seep down into the ideas of the every person and become the ideas of the layman, the people who don't need to be philosophically enlightened. It just becomes a part of everyday life for everyone so that they start thinking this way, and it becomes a natural way to view the mind and the body. So a dualism is a synonym for a binary opposition. It's a two-category system where there's two oppositional pairs that are mutually exclusive and mutually exhaustive. So going back to the male-female binary, according to that dualism, there are only males and there are only females, and you have to be one or the other. And if you're one, then you're necessarily the inverse of the other. And for all these categories we're dealing with in our everyday experiences, the mind, the body, woman and man, and nature and culture, these things can't be so reductively and simplistically divided like that. They overlap with each other in very significant ways. And just like the male-female binary, how the male was conceived as the positive, and then the male was conceived as the negative, everything that the man is not, that's what defines woman as the shadow of man, as de Beauvoir said. It's the same thing with the mind-body dualism. All the things that are conflated with men, all the good things, the mind is conflated with all that good stuff, all the positive stuff, all the default stuff in our everyday discourse. And then the body is always a secondary consideration, in a subjugated position, a subordinate position, always defined in relation to the mind, just as woman is always defined in relation to man. So the mind is the one, the capital O-N-E, and then the body is the capital O, other. And that means there are processes of otherization happening within us, within each and every one of us. A splitting of ourselves, an alienation of an integral part of ourselves from ourselves. So our ways of thinking that originated from the Enlightenment period of Western philosophy split us into two and divide us and our everyday experiences into these somewhat arbitrary categories, these Cartesian dualistic categories. So that was dualistic thinking founded by Rene Descartes and his Cartesian dualisms. But Baruch Spinoza, another Enlightenment philosopher, rejected the notion that life can be so easily divided into Cartesian dualism, such as nature and culture, man and woman, or mind and body. He instead proposed a monistic theory. So if dualistic means two, then monistic means one, where he sees the mind and body as coming from the same source, and thus neither is superior to the other, and they exist on an equal footing with one another. I'll let you do the Elizabeth Gross reading where it talks about Spinoza's ontology, his ethics of existing, his theory of being, as basically all of life is just one substance that expresses itself in different ways. So the mind and the body are expressions of a same and single substance. You can think of it like the whole world is just this amorphous, shifting blob. And all of existence is just this blob that expresses itself in different ways. And we are all just expressions of this substance that he keeps referring to. And our minds and bodies are just differently formed expressions of that same substance. They are not separate, they're not self-contained. They and we are all inherent to this one substantial being. So Spinoza's proposition and formulation cuts through Cartesian dualisms, such as the mind and body, and allows us to see the mind and body as expressions of the same substance, just taking different forms, as if all of existence is like this Play-Doh that sometimes expresses itself through our mental thoughts, but could just as easily and readily express itself through our bodily existence. So instead of thinking it in terms of one or the other, we can think of it in terms of one and the other, where one is the other. Like our subjectivity, what's going on in our minds, are always an embodied subjectivity. And vice versa, our corporeal reality, what's going on in our bodies, are psychical in the sense that our existence in our body is always psychically affected by our minds, just as our existence in our minds are always physically affected by our bodies. They're not mutually exclusive, self-contained spheres of existence. They're all one. This monistic ontology does have its own fair share of flaws. Like if you thought dualism was reductionist, then this is reducing it even further. This is dividing the two categories, so now it's just one. Or rather not dividing the two categories, but just mushing them together. Merging them together so now everything is one category, which can be problematic in itself for various reasons, but at least it doesn't divide our ways of thinking into two. At least it's not a divisive way of thinking. And you'll notice that Spinoza passed away in 1677, and his book on the ethics of existence, where he formulated his ontology, wasn't published until 1677. So his book was published posthumously. It wasn't finished. It was his life's work, his magnum opus, and it kind of became a cult classic. It was actually condemned at first and banned by the Catholic Church at the time when it first came out. And for the next 100 years after its initial release, it was just kind of something to be repressed from the circulation of knowledge and not published or printed anywhere. It was kind of something that academics whispered about behind closed doors, like Thomas Hobbes and John Locke and David Hume were just kind of whispering to each other like, hey, did you hear about Spinoza's ethics? It's actually kind of interesting because it was so provocative and radically different and borderline scandalous at a time that was very much dominated by Cartesian and dualist ways of thinking in academia and everywhere in life. But then centuries later, post-Enlightenment, Spinoza's work did experience a resurgence of sorts and made a comeback and helped to initiate and characterize a lot of postmodern and post-Enlightenment thinking centuries later, albeit with many modifications. Because like I said, just thinking of everything as just one single substance can be flawed if you don't take into account the complexities of said substance and of existence. And another thing I should briefly point out is that personally, Spinoza was born in Amsterdam, so he was technically Dutch, but he was of Portuguese and Jewish descent. So maybe there was something similar going on there, as we discussed with previous theorists, with his personal upbringing as an outsider and his lived experience as such, where he never quite felt like he fit in, potentially shaping many of his theories. So like we noted with Stuart Hall and Michel Foucault, how they're kind of outsiders in their own places and times, and that feeling of being an outsider may have helped shape Spinoza's views as well, just like Foucault's and Hall's views, to be more inclusive and considerate of perspectives that were outside of the dominant paradigmatic ways of thinking and not just reinforce these dualistic divisions that predominated at the time, these conceptual divisions, but also the resultant social divisions that hierarchize and subordinate certain groups. So this mind-body dualism, along with many long-held tenets of Enlightenment thinking that defined modern Western philosophy, was later rejected by many postmodern philosophers who sought to explain bodies as more than just a thing of nature that needs to be reined in by our minds. This was undertaken by a lot of feminist thinkers because, like I said with the previous slide, the faulty dualistic thinking and categories, and thus the social inequalities and power inequalities that are inherent to them, have been extended from the body and mind to women and men. Like I said, Spinoza wasn't perfect. He didn't solve everything with his monistic ontology, but there were reactions to and modifications of Spinoza's ideas so as to conceive the body as various other things besides just a natural object. So the body can be seen as a site of power struggle. That is, our body as a product of these cultural and social and political discourses that surround us at any given time and shape largely how we view our bodies and how we treat our bodies and how we allow others to treat our bodies. And just as we can struggle against the meanings that are placed upon us by discourse and through discourse, we can struggle against the meanings that are attached to our bodies to change how we and others view and use our bodies. We can also view our bodies as not only stationary signifiers, but active generators of signification, proliferators of new signs and signifiers and meanings. We can express ourselves through our bodies, much like the Greeks did with their body building, and also through stuff like body language, or potentially artistic and liberating uses of the body and like live performance art or photography of our bodies, or dancing or contortion or yoga, or like the way we dress our bodies, as we'll get to soon when we discuss fashion. Our clothing, or perhaps lack thereof, can make statements and produce meanings and change meanings related to the body. And again, this is a site of power struggle because sometimes our bodies are used as signifiers by other people or other institutions or groups, such as, like we mentioned, scientific discourse, which seeks to relegate the body as just an object of knowledge, or a lot of fitness and health magazines and discourse that seeks to assign meaning to your body that may benefit them and the capitalist production of the health and fitness industry and all of its consumable products, so that they're trying to tell you how to derive meaning from your bodily experiences, and they're trying to discursively construct what you should see as desirable for your body and what you should consequently avoid and pursue in relation to your own relationship with your own body. So a body is a wellspring of potential meanings within any given cultural context. The body can also be seen as a constant process of change. It's not only undergoing a process of change, it is change. Just like we said with gender and how it's not a fixed essence that is fixed in place. Remember what Butler said, how it's a live performance. It's an ongoing process of becoming more, becoming something else. Our bodies are always in this process of becoming. Like we may not be conscious of it because on the surface everything seems relatively static and stationary. But right now there's blood flowing through your bloodstream, and red blood cells and white blood cells, and your stomach acids are gurgling and digesting whatever you ate, and your heart is pumping. Like right beneath the surface, there's a lot of upheaval and constant change that produces the static, stationary image you see on the surface. It's beneath the skin, so to speak. And you can even look at it from the perspective that apparently all of our cells in our body, each and every cell that constitutes you and composes you right now is replaced. After 7 years, every single cell that is currently forming part of you is gone and replaced by a new cell. Even the ones in your brain, the ones that form the cells that compose your brain matter, will all be completely different within 7 years. So that there's like physically, there's no relation between who you are now and who you are 7 years ago or 7 years in the future. There's not a single cell that's remained with you. So in that strictest technical sense, you and your body are a completely different person, a completely different body on a cellular level. So our bodies aren't just a product of change, they are a process of change. Our bodies can also be seen as existing at an intersection between our agency as individual social agents to exercise our agency and use our bodies in ways we want, and the social structures and historical context in which we and our agency is situated at any given time, and the tension between our agency and the structures surrounding us that try to limit our agency and structure our agency so that we exercise it in some ways but not others. And that's the point that Bourdieu was trying to make regarding habitus and taste formation, how it's the merging of structure into agency so that our bodies are a structuring structure and a structured structure that reproduces through our taste and our habitus the existing social structures that are surrounding us that we then internalized, thus blurring that binary. Again, it's another binary between agency and structure. Bourdieu sees them as blended together within the site of the body. So there's a whole proliferation of postmodern ways to view our bodies and treat our bodies that go beyond either the monistic one-sided categorization or the dualistic two-sided categorizations that have predominated in terms of our conceptualization of our bodies up to this point.